one of the most successful mafia bosses of all time. Despite his humble beginnings and mistakes that would have ended any lesser man's mob career, he quickly rose to the top. By the end of his career, he was in control of the 5 most influential crime families of New York. When we think of organized crime, the Italian mafia is often the first thing we think of. We picture mob bosses with booming voices, sporting expensive suits and white fedoras. Historically, the term mafia refers only to organized crime in Sicily, but it has come to refer to all Italian organized crime, including foreign mafias in America. Vincent Gigante was born in New York City in 1928, the child of 2 first-generation immigrants from Naples. His Italian given name, Vincenzo, and his mother's heavy pronunciation of the second syllable led to his nickname, the Chin. Growing up in a predominantly Italian-American community, Gigante was heavily exposed to mafia activity. He dropped out of high school at 16 and became a fairly successful boxer, earning himself a name and providing additional income for his family. Around the same time, he started running with the crime family, which was soon to be named the Genovese crime family. He was arrested 7 times between the ages of 17 and 25 for gang-related crimes, including gun violence, illegal gambling, and receiving stolen goods. His sentences were never longer than 2 months. When he was 29, Gigante was ordered by Vito Genovese, the recently returned leader of the crime family, to murder Frank Costello. Costello had taken power from Genovese when he was forced to flee to Italy to avoid prosecution on the charge of murder. Now that Genovese had returned, he wanted his power back. Gigante shot Costello in the head and fled, thinking that his hit had been successful. In reality, the bullet only grazed the side of Costello's head. A failed hit usually meant that the assailant would be killed, or at least no longer welcome in organized crime. Gigante, however, inexplicably continued to rise in power. From age 32 to 37, he was imprisoned for heroin trafficking in the same cell as Genovese himself, which only served to strengthen his relationship with the boss. Gigante was released on parole before Genovese was, and he appointed him the title of Capo Regime, which left him in charge of a crew of soldiers. Gigante's crew soon became one of the most powerful in New York. He was involved with loan sharking, bookmaking, hijacking, extortion, and labor racketeering in Lower Manhattan. Genovese died in prison in 1969. Gigante's childhood associate Philip Benny Squint Lombardo led the family until 1981, when he gave the boss seat to Gigante at 53 years old. Scholar Mark Dixon states, "It marked a stunning transformation. A low-rent boxer and a failed hitman had somehow risen to one of the top positions in the American mafia." The newly appointed mob boss quickly hired Anthony "Fat Tony" Salerno to take the formal position of front boss in order to focus law enforcement's attention away from himself. He also maintained a street boss, Liborio Bellomo, a messenger, Dominic Cirillo, and an underboss, Venero Benny Eggs Mangano, who carried Gigante's orders to his soldiers. With all of these men willing to go to prison, or even die for Gigante, he quickly gained substantial power. He soon became the boss of all bosses, heading all 5 of the major crime families of New York. The final element in his scheme to avoid detection of law enforcement was feigned insanity. The first record of his mental instability was in 1969, when he was investigated on charges of bribery. The charges were dropped because psychiatrists determined that he was mentally unfit to stand trial. When, in 1986, Fat Tony was imprisoned on a 100-year sentence for murder and racketeering, the boss's feigned insanity was all that remained to protect him. He would wander the streets in pajamas or other tattered clothes, a bathrobe, and house slippers. He always had bodyguards with him, and always ended up at known mafia hangouts. His mother helped his scheme by telling authorities that he had suffered from mental illness all his life. Gigante's plea of insanity worked until the 1990s, when he was once again charged for murder and racketeering. This time, people testified against him, including Salvatore Sammy the Bull Gravano. He told the judge the truth. Vincent Gigante was not insane. He was simply a man capable of manipulation beyond imagination. In 1997, Gigante's murder charges were dropped, but he was still sentenced to 12 years in prison for racketeering and conspiracy. While serving this sentence, he was convicted again of new racketeering charges, as well as obstruction of justice. Law enforcement suspected that he was still running the crime family from prison and wanted to charge him for faking mental illness to delay his previous trial. In order to secure a lighter sentence for his son, Andrew, who had been convicted for running messages for the mob, Gigante pleaded guilty in 2003, admitting to faking his madness for 30 years. By admitting, he added only 3 additional years to his sentence. He died in prison on December 19, 2005. Psychologist Thomas Merton categorizes Gigante's feigned insanity as pure malingering, or total, deliberate invention of symptoms for personal gain. He argues that this invention of psychiatric disorders is not as rare as most people think, and that professionals must be carefully trained to recognize this skillful display of mental illness. From winning over a crowd in a boxing match, to inspiring men to die in his place, to escaping from prosecution for decades by feigning insanity, Gigante was undoubtedly a master of manipulation.